Hey friends, today is a day of hot takes, so I'm just going to get into it. Self-esteem is a trap, and you should avoid it. That's the video. Thanks, like and subscribe, leave me a comment, something like that. Actually, that kind of could be the video, but I should probably explain a little bit about why I think self-esteem is a trap and why I think that feedback should be fun for everybody. In fact, I think that, and this is another hot take, I understand, life is just tremendously better when we don't do things correctly. Perfection leaves no room for improvement. And so to do something perfectly is to stagnate. To do something perfectly, or to attach the perfect label to whatever we do, is to just not ever get better. And the thing is that there's always something that could be better. So let me talk you through why I think self-esteem is a trap. Self-esteem is really just how you think about yourself, right? It's how you feel about who you are and what you do, okay? And the typical wisdom, which incidentally is being disproven at a staggering rate by a lot of research, but the typical wisdom has been that in order for somebody to do well, they need to have self-esteem. And that is actually really just not true. I have kids, and I'm going to totally throw them under the bus here. But I want you to understand that I'm throwing myself under the bus as well, because anything that I say about what I observe in my children is true of me as well. Okay? So keep that in mind. Often, I will see my children examine a task, do a really quick mental assessment to determine whether or not they can do the task well, and then decide whether they're going to do the task based on how well they think it will go. Hopefully you can already understand why that's not a good thing. Determining whether we're going to do a task based on the outcome it's just not a good way to assess tasks, because there are all sorts of things in life that we're just not good at, or we're not as good as we could be. And so the problem is that self-esteem shows up and it says, well, I am a person who does things well, right? I do everything well. And so I can't do something that will disprove how I think about myself or how I feel about myself. There was a point with one of my kids where I complimented their drawing, and they stopped improving in their drawing. I said, "Oh, you drew that really well." And they were like, "Thanks, that's cool. I appreciate it." And then I noticed something interesting. They drew the same picture over and over and over again. And when I talked to them about it, it became clear really, really quickly that they were worried that if they drew something else, they wouldn't do it well, and I wouldn't think they were good at drawing anymore. And now, as an adult, that's like, you think to yourself, oh, well, that's obviously not, that's not a good way to approach a situation. That's not a good way to do this. But how many times do we do that with our writing? How many times do we do that with all the different tasks we're faced with? You know, when I write my stories, I do feel pressure to write them the same way, to not, branch out and try new ways of writing. I feel pressure to produce the same results. When somebody says to me, Seth, I like this book you wrote, the impulse to just write the same book again gets, it's strong. And it's because we naturally think this way, right? that if I have a particular value, right? I am good at drawing, I'm good at writing, then doing anything that would disprove that is a no-go. We're not going to do it. I'm not going to try writing in a new genre. I'm not going to try writing in a new style. I'm not going to try writing in a different way than I already have. But this becomes really, really toxic because sometimes it turns into, I'm not going to finish the book because that might prove that I'm not as good a writer as I think I am. I'm not going to flesh out my characters because they might still be flat. I'm not going to start writing because what if I do it poorly? What if people don't like it? I'm not going to publish my book because, well, people might think it's a bad book, and then that will make me a bad author. Do you understand how toxic that can get? And how those thoughts can just infiltrate into our lives? So, if self-esteem is a trap, then what do you do? How do you put yourself in a position where feedback can be fun, where you are able to do all of these things and try all of these things without failure crushing you? I can't actually answer that question conclusively because everybody's different. I can only tell you what it is I do, okay? And I'm not saying this is going to work for everybody. In fact, maybe it won't work for anybody except for me. But I'm fairly confident that for the mass majority of people, what I'm about to say will actually work. In fact, I'm really confident that it will work because I've seen it over and over and over again. And I've seen it in myself, and I've seen it in other people. And this is the only thing I've seen that really works consistently. Now, again, your mileage may vary. So take this with a grain of salt, run it through your own filters, understand it, and how it might apply to you. But this is the basic principle. It's called aggressive humility. It's just assume that you suck and that you're going to get better. And that's it. So when I approach a new thing, when I start to write a book, when I, get towards the end of a book, I just assume it's not going to be as good as I would want it to be, and then I work on getting better. But because my expectation is, this isn't going to be perfect, this isn't going to be exactly what I want it to be, it's just going to be my best effort to hit that goal, then inevitably, when I find something that can be improved, when I find something in my story or in my storytelling or in the style I've written it in or the cadence, the plotting, right? When I find something that can be improved, I go, ooh, man, that could really be improved. And then I go and improve it, and I get better. And I feel excited about the fact that I found something that could be improved. So recently, I say recently, a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I wrote a book called Soul Caller. And Soul Caller is a book that I just loved tremendously. I loved it. It was a style of writing that I had never written before, but it was a style that was emulating some of my favorite books of all time. Okay, and I botched it pretty badly. This is always nuanced to talk about because some people are going to read the book and be like, Seth, it was fine. Like, it was fine. But when I read back over book 1 of that series, because then I later wrote book 2, right? When I read back over book 1, I saw some really significant, glaring errors that I made. Some pacing problems. And it stung for a moment. Right? Because I read over the book and I was like, ooh, Seth, like, what were you even thinking? Like, why did you think this was going to work? But because I have this assumption that none of my books are going to be as good as I want them to be, None of my books are going to be perfect because I'm constantly learning and I'm constantly improving and I'm constantly getting better. It didn't sting very long. And in fact, I started to think to myself, man, this is cool, right? I learned a super valuable lesson. I tried to take two genres and I tried to mesh them together, and I got a pacing discrepancy wrong. I didn't do a good job in aligning the pacing. Cool, you know what? That means the next time I go to do that, I'm going to have a much better chance of hitting my target. I'm going to have a much better chance of succeeding. So this concept of aggressive humility says, not I'm really good at this thing, so I should go do it. It says, I'm not as good at this thing as I want to be, but the only way I'm going to get there is by trying, is by doing it. And so I'm going to do it, and I'm going to find out what I missed and figure out where I did it wrong, and I'm going to do it again. Then I'm going to figure out where I did it wrong, and I'm going to figure out what I missed, and I'm going to do it again. And I'm going to fix something every single time. And this is how we should be approaching things. This is how we should be approaching our writing. This is how we should be approaching our publishing. If we have a launch and it doesn't go well, cool. I knew I wasn't going to do it as well as it possibly could be done, right? I knew I wasn't going to do it perfectly. So what does it matter that I didn't do it perfectly? In fact, that's actually an opportunity for me. That's a good thing. It's good that I can understand what went wrong. It's good that I can see the problem so that I can fix it for next time. Because we have time. We get to do this over and over and over again, right? It's not like you only get one shot at writing a book. It's not like you only get one shot at launching. It's not like you only get one shot at pretty much anything. You can try again. You can learn from your mistakes and you can move forward. So when we have self-esteem around things, right? When we feel a particular way about ourselves, often that becomes our excuse for not getting better, for not improving, because we don't want to disprove how we feel. We don't want to make ourselves look like a liar. But if, on the other hand, you take this aggressive humility and you say, okay, I am not as good as I want to be. There is room for improvement. And guess what? If you write a book and somebody doesn't like it and they say, "Ooh, this one isn't good," you can say, "Cool, what's one thing that I can improve? What's something that I can do better?" And that brings us to a couple small, super practical things that you can do in order to improve, that you can do that will make feedback fun and rewarding. The most important thing is to make small changes, right? What's my favorite question? What's one thing that I can improve? Okay. And as you're asking that question, make sure that you're looking for small things, right? And going small has two advantages. First of all, it's easier to track. Okay, so imagine with me, I wrote a book and the pacing was all off. And somebody came to me and said, "Seth, I didn't like this one." If I said, "What are all the things that are wrong with it?" They might give me a list. They might give me a list of 2 or 3, maybe 5, maybe 10. If it was really bad, maybe 15 things that they really didn't like about the book. If I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to fix all of them for the next book. Do you know how hard it would be to track whether or not I actually did it? Because I'm just juggling too much. There's too much to pay attention to. If instead they came to me and said, "Seth, this book, not it. I didn't like it at all." And I said, "Okay, what is the thing that you think would have had the greatest impact on the book? What's the thing you hated the most?" And they say the pacing. The pacing was just totally off. It had this weird meandering pacing at the beginning, and then it just sped up at the end, and then there was a cliffhanger, but it was like it didn't work. That is actually my own personal assessment of Soul Collar Book 1. It just didn't work at all. Okay, so it's pacing. Pacing is the thing. For the next book, I'm not going to be worried about whether my characters are better. I'm not going to be worried about whether, my descriptions are better. I'm not going to be worried about how tight the plot is or, whether I have plot holes, stuff like that. No, don't care. I'm just working on pacing. Because that's measurable. Because I can go back to that person and say, hey, you remember how you read this book and you didn't like the pacing? Can you read the second book as a favor to me? Or at least read a couple of chapters from it? And just tell me, is the pacing better? That is quantifiable. Because that person is going to come back to you and say yes or no. Yes, the pacing is better. I liked it more. Or no, the pacing is not. And in fact, I have had that very experience. Right? The pacing was off for book 1 of Soul Caller. Book 2 came out, and pretty much everybody who has read it has said, Seth, when is the third coming? Stop writing your other series. Hurry up and write the third. Right? A drastic difference in reception to the book because I paid attention to one thing and I improved that one thing. And I had the thing that had the greatest impact. So another really practical tip. You're focused on one thing. Try and fix the problem as simply as possible, right? Look for the place where the problem is the worst. Sometimes it's all the way throughout, right? And then it takes a little bit more work. But normally I have found that it really only takes one more page inserted into the story to shift the pacing. Or one paragraph. Sometimes even a sentence, just a sentence, can completely transform a story. But you have to know what that sentence needs to be. You have to know what the paragraph needs to be about. You have to know where the page needs to go. Right? So identifying that crux point, that one thing, and then doing it simply. Don't get in your own head about it. Don't think that you have to do a full rewrite of your story. No. The problem is normally simpler than you think it is, and the solution is usually simpler than you think it is. So, pick one thing to improve and do it in as little time and space as possible. And then the last thing that I would suggest you do is when you're getting feedback from people, when people are telling you that your thing sucks, brainstorm with them. Try to involve them in the process. The reality is that the ideas we have first are usually our worst ideas. Not always, but usually. And the ideas we have later are usually better. And the same thing is true with other people, right? A lot of other people will not necessarily produce better ideas, but a few other people who you can bounce ideas off of usually produces better ideas than a single individual. And so when you are in the feedback process, and somebody gives you criticism, don't think to yourself, oh, I'm terrible. I'm such a bad writer. This is just proof that I'm a terrible writer. Think to yourself, hey, great, this is an opportunity to improve. But more than that, this is an opportunity to get somebody else's insight and wisdom. This is an opportunity to essentially double my creative capacity. So start asking questions. Why didn't you like that? What about it felt off to you? Do you think it was the power progression? Do you think it was the relationships? Do you think it was how quickly the character adapts to their circumstances? You can ask all of these things. And then you can ask, hey, if you could insert a scene into this story that would just completely fix the problem, what kind of scene would you put in? What would be a cool thing to have happen that the character could do that would fix this problem? And you'd be amazed. Sometimes readers are going to give you the best answers ever, right? Sometimes they're going to give you answers or ideas that will just completely solve your problem. Sometimes they're going to give you ideas that suck. That's just sort of the nature of creative work, though, right? But in all of this, you want to make sure that you are approaching it understanding that this is not your final try. This is not your magnum opus. This is not, the thing for which you will be remembered for all time. I mean, it might be, but you can't determine that. So assume it's not going to be. Assume that this is just going to be another attempt at getting better. Live with this aggressive humility. And if you can do that, you're going to find that life all of a sudden becomes a lot easier. I mean, it might not feel very good sometimes, but it does become easier. You know, you get better at improving. And as you get better at improving, you get better at trying. And as you get better at trying, all of a sudden life opens up. And there are all of these opportunities for you. Anyway, I could probably talk about this subject forever, so I'll get off my soapbox. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments down below. Let me know what you think about this video. Let me know one thing that I can improve. I would love that, actually. Don't forget to like and subscribe, etc., etc., etc. And thank you. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you in the next one.